Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we are going to discuss a topic that affects a lot of people. Here on this channel, we're very often talking to people who are interested in relocating outside of their country. Now, you don't have to. You certainly could form a business in another company or another country and do some things like that to optimize your tax, or maybe you're going to do banking around the world, or maybe you're going to invest around the world, etc. But very, very often we're talking about leaving your country. And very often a reason for doing that is because you want to change your tax status. Or even if you don't want to change your tax status, it's kind of an inevitable part of relocating. And so the question becomes, when do you cease to be a tax resident of the country that you are departing from? I'm going to answer that question for you today. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for your support, appreciate it. If you like the videos, please share them with your friends. And if you would like help with relocating abroad, optimizing your international tax, getting second residencies, citizenships, doing global investing, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. Or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so what is the issue here? Well, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you are leaving Canada, just for a simple example. Okay, and in order to leave Canada, what do you have to do? You have to sever your ties, you have to spend time outside of the country, and you have to typically establish yourself in another country. So the question then becomes, at what point, and of course leave the country, at what point in all of this do you cease to be a tax resident of Canada? Is it when you physically leave the country? Is it when you cut your ties to the country? Is it when you get established in the new country? Is it when you file your exit return? This last one is kind of especially interesting because a bunch of people end up going not knowing they're supposed to file an exit return, don't do it. In the case of some place like UK, there's a Form P85 that you need to file. So depending on which country you're leaving, there may be different procedures. And what if you just didn't do that procedure? Does that mean you're still stuck in the old system? Now, as with almost everything that I discuss on this channel, it really depends. It is case by case specific. So I think the biggest piece of guidance I can give to anyone watching videos is don't try and get a one-size-fits-all. Dive into the details and nuances of the situation. Again, if you want help with that, please reach out to me. But that's really, really important because the rules in Czech Republic are different than the rules in Canada, which are different than the rules in the States. In the US, you never cease to be tax resident, unless you give up your citizenship, so that's a whole other conversation. But for everybody else, usually the way that they determine it is based on the later of a few dates, okay? Now, so what does this mean? Usually you can't cease to be tax resident until the date you leave a country. So that's the earliest possible that you would be able to cease to be tax resident, okay? Now, if you leave and you still have ties and that country still considers that ties matter, then it's usually not until you sever those ties that you're considered to be tax resident in the other country. Usually when you file the form, doesn't have any bearing. Usually that is not what determines whether you're tax resident or not. Generally, tax residency is a function of fact, not of form, and so somewhat irrelevant. Okay? You cease to be based on the facts. In some circumstances, if you leave late enough in the year, you will have spent enough time during that year that they'll consider you tax resident for the whole year. And so this can be a good reason for a lot of people to consider leaving in the first 6 months of the year. Sometimes I find people are like, hey, I want to kind of time it so that around the end of the year I leave and that's clean. That's fine if you want to basically say, okay, I was tax resident for this entire year and now I want to have everything cleaned off and now I come into the new year as a tax resident somewhere else. Perfectly fair, perfectly reasonable. But in some cases, if you go early enough in the year, then you could potentially avoid it for that period of time or even that whole year, depending on what's going on. So I sometimes tell people, every day that you stay is costing you in some form. Now, of course, it takes time to arrange things, etc., but that's the deal. The last thing is it may be based on when you get established in another country. So a general rule of thumb is that if you have to leave, cut your ties, and get established in a new country, it will typically be the later of those three, unless the third part is not a requirement for that country. So in other words, to the extent that these things are not a requirement for the country that you're in, this would be the case. And the one overriding factor that could sometimes play into it is maybe you've been there long enough that you're tax resident for the entire year. So bottom line is, make sure you do all those things. and recognize that you will probably cease to be a tax resident at the latest of those dates rather than the earliest. So you kind of want to line all pieces up, because it's not so simple in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, of simply leaving everything else and not being tax residents. I hope that helps. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.